Okay, fantastic. So yeah, let's get started with the with the webinar. So yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us this morning. So Alice, you could quickly just click through to the next slide for us. That would be fantastic. Fantastic. So just before we get started, just a couple of sort of housekeeping for the webinar. So you are currently all muted, but if you do have any questions, please just drop them into the chat box on the screen. Alternatively, you can email tell me more at bytes.co.uk afterwards. So with regards to the sort of questions, any questions that are asked, we'll try to pick those up sort of throughout the session. So we won't do sort of a Q&A at the end. What Al will try to do is just sort of pick them up as they come in. This is a recorded session and it will be available on demand afterwards as well, so we'll get that sent out to you shortly after the event. And we've got a survey at the end as well, so if you could please just complete that. That's just some great feedback for us, and also the opportunity for yourselves to speak to a specialist. So yep, I'll stop talking, so I'll hand it over to Al, who's going to be presenting the podcast for us today.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Andrew. So just quickly just have a look at the agenda. So what we're going to be covering off today is obviously around Microsoft Teams and Voice, and just looking at the different options and how you can deploy it. So whether you're using calling plans or enterprise voice or direct routing or bring your own carrier. So we'll be covering off the differences around that, as well as the things like the advanced call handling features, so IVRs, ACD, and all the different options that you have around that, and then looking at best practices around change management, end user training and adoption, and then taking a bit of a high level view of the additional insights that you can have within Microsoft Teams in the forms of things like using Power BI to bring out intelligent reporting. So with that, so I'm Al Cumberworth, so I'm obviously the Bytes Microsoft Unified Communications Specialist. So I've been working with Microsoft for the past 12 years on Microsoft Voice deployments, you know, ranging from 50 users right up to 300,000 users. So obviously, when we're taking a look at what Microsoft is from a platform perspective, obviously Microsoft are one of the global leaders from a platform infrastructure and UCaaS perspective. So highly available, highly redundant platform, obviously providing enterprise grade telephony. Now this has been, you know, running for years. So for anybody who has a sort of a misconception that this is, you know, quite a new thing, it's not. Microsoft have been delivering voice and PBX replacements since back in the OCS R2 days. So, you know, that's sort of 12 years ago. So they have got a lot of heritage in telephony, and obviously building those core capabilities out to help customers move from traditional PBXs, whether that's Avayas, Mitel, Cisco's, into the world of Microsoft. As well as that, obviously, you know, within the world of Microsoft Teams, where we've seen a lot of adoption happening over the last 18 months, especially through the pandemic, we're seeing, you know, this hybrid working environment expedited. You know, Microsoft now has, I think it's up to 145 million daily active users on Microsoft Teams. You know, and that's with a lot of people working from home and helping support that hybrid approach. So, you know, you have everything that you need from a communications, you know, different modalities, whether it's IM&P, audio conferencing, collaboration, remote desktop, obviously using it as a core platform to help engage with customers and moving away from, you know, traditional sort of PSTN based calling. You've also got obviously different options, as I mentioned, around calling plans, direct routing. So, you know, we'll be taking a look at, you know, how you can do those integration and port methodologies. And obviously, you know, with Teams is a single interface across multiple devices. So whether you're on Android, OS, or, you know, anything else, it will work across, you know, a number of different platforms. So it really does give that flexibility of working from anywhere across multiple different devices. So let's just take a bit of a look into what is direct routing. So direct routing is effectively a service provider, and in this instance, obviously, it's Bytes. We have strategic Microsoft Gold partners that we work with, you know, and been working with for a number of years, that provide these level of services. because ultimately when you look at what direct routing is and how all of that hooks together, you've basically got session border controllers that are carrier grade, either in colo data centers or sat within Microsoft Azure, that provide integration into carrier networks, whether that's BT/IPX, whether it's Gamma, Tata communications. So giving that real security and redundancy and protection via those SIP fronts from those carriers into those accredited SBCs. So when I say accredited, so Microsoft runs its own accreditation programs with various different providers, vendors, whether that's handsets, headsets, SBCs, or contact centers. It's all certified. It has to be certified for Microsoft in order to become a direct routing partner. So what we're doing is just taking a look at what that kind of resilience looks like under the hood. Obviously, you've got those 2 data centers, which you've got diverse carrier connectivity coming from different network providers. So that's basically how you're providing customers with 99.9% uptime on that PSTN side. And the important thing to note is, obviously, it's a pure cloud telephony platform. So there's nothing required on premise. There are a few instances, depending where you're located. I'll cover that off in a bit more detail, but it's few and far between. So it's a pure cloud platform that allows customers to take full advantage of moving to the cloud, and obviously having that SLA back to ensure that should anything happen with connectivity, something goes down, I can't connect to M365, then those calls can be rediverted to either mobiles or landlines, depending on what the preference is from a customer standpoint. So bringing your own carrier. So this is mainly used when you've got regulated countries. So places like Dubai, Russia, China, they all are heavily regulated when it comes to a telco perspective. So for anybody who's got customers with large geographically dispersed offices, then this is an option that they sometimes will look at, as well as if they've got existing contracts in place with carriers that have another 12 or 24 months to run. They may want to have that period of time to integrate and port, and the way that they do that is by using virtual SBCs in different Azure regions to be able to connect it back into those PSTN providers or SIP providers that have that regulatory compliance within those countries. The other thing to take into consideration is through billing as well. So, how billing is handled, whether a customer wants to be centrally billed or needs to be billed in region. Obviously, that comes down to taxation laws and everything else, which needs to be taken into consideration. So you've got a lot of options around direct routing for international solutions. So you've obviously got these carriers. So you might have heard of the Carrier Connect program. So you can have a blended approach when you look at deploying Microsoft on a global scale. So we've got numbers available in 78 countries with local DDI numbers. Obviously got the multi-currency support, and it's all delivered through premium tier 1 network providers, and it basically works very effectively from a cost consolidation standpoint, where we see a lot of customers that have multiple different PBXs and have multiple different connectivity providers coming into those PBXs. It can be quite a challenge from a cost control perspective, to make sure that centralizing that is going to help reduce the complexity of managing different vendors. But not only that, it rationalizes down the cost centers, a number of vendors, and obviously it's a lot more advantageous to have 1 or 2 partners providing that PSTN telephony element, rather than what can be up to 20 or 30 different providers, depending on the size of the customer and the number of locations that they have. So what we're seeing now is some really interesting options for customers to integrate into their own legacy PBXs. So if we look at something like a Cisco environment or a Mitel environment, what you'll typically find is these environments have, or these vendors have their own session border controllers. So in the case of Mitel, you have Mitel Border Gateway. In the case of Cisco, you have Cisco queues. So what we can do here is take a SIP from the direct routing partners, SBC, integrate that into the customer's on-premise PBX via those session border controllers. That then allows for a far more optimal way of migrating users across. So what a lot of people are doing now is porting those numbers across to the direct routing provider, having that integration back into the existing on-premise telephony phone system to then allow for the end user migration and adoption to happen. So that can be, depending again on number of users, number of sites, number of DDI ranges and things like that we all take into consideration when we're designing in these type of projects. It allows for that seamless transition to happen, so you can have that coexistence period where you've got users using the existing telephony platform and users using Teams, and then you can slowly migrate all those users across to Microsoft Teams with voice, and then get rid of your PBX and retire that, and then you obviously have everything as a pure cloud-based solution. So let's take a quick look at direct routing versus calling plans. So obviously calling plans are only available in specific countries. They're individually licensed with a committed amount of minutes, so that kind of ranges from 120 minutes to 1,200 minutes for domestic and international, and that's based on a per user per month model. Now that is pooled across the users in a region, or say if you've got an office in France, it will cover France, and if you've got an office in the UK, it will cover all those users in the UK. So that's really great if you've got greenfield sites that you've just, you're taking on, say opening a new office. It's really quick to do it. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to be able to spin those up within the tenant. But that's, we see a very low percentage of Microsoft customers that are deploying Teams, deploying it with calling plans, because it is quite cost prohibitive. Obviously that kind of varies depending on what the customer has in terms of CSP or number of users, if they've got an enterprise agreement and things like that. And in negotiations, then those prices can vary slightly. But with direct routing, it gives you far more flexibility in terms of all those points I mentioned about being able to integrate into session border controllers and have that coexistence period. You also get a committed pool of minutes, so it's not pay as you go per user. It's pulled across the entire user base. So what we're seeing is, especially now, organizations are not making as many outbound calls as they were doing 18 months ago. So the amount of minutes they're actually using from an outbound perspective has dropped off massively. So being able to have a pool of minutes, say 5 or 10,000 or 20,000, depending on the volumes of outbound calls, is a far more cost-effective way of doing it. And the good thing about having just a pool of minutes is the concepts of, as you'll be aware, that things like ISDN are going to become end of life in the next few years in favour of SIP. Now, the way that obviously ISDN was doing, you had to buy it in sets of channels, so like ISDN 30. Now, you might not utilise all those channels, but you still have to pay for them. And you used to have to scope in that when you were looking at capacity planning. So obviously making sure that things like concurrency ratios are correct, that you're not going to get, busy town if you're trying to make an outbound call or a customer's trying to dial in. The idea with direct routing and these pool of minutes is you have infinite capacity. These session border controls, as I mentioned, are carrier grade. They scale up, they could have a huge amount of concurrent number of calls going through them. So it gives customers that peace of mind that if they grow or they grow through acquisition, the number of users, that they can just seamlessly scale up without worrying about having issues with capacity. So it really does change all of that sort of historic concept of having sizing problems and capacity issues, and making sure that all of that was scoped in and defined. The other areas which you need to take into consideration if customers are thinking about calling plans is that you can't overlay calling plans with third-party technology. So where we have people like ISVs, and I'll touch on this a bit later, and do things like contact center, and do things like complex IVR and call flows, it's just not possible with calling plans because obviously it's owned by Microsoft and it's run by Microsoft and they make all the changes. And it's you know, a multi-tenanted instance of their platform. So, you know, there's very little that can be done for making bespoke custom changes on a individual customer by customer basis. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of additional feature functionality that sits over the top of the Microsoft stack. And this is provided by partners like our friends at Teleware. There are obviously a lot of other partners that Bytes work with from a cloud contact center perspective, call recording and things like that. But you know, primarily, you know, Bytes has partnered with Teleware, primarily because we've been working with them for a number of years, and they've been in the telecommunications market for the last 30 years, and have been a Microsoft partner for the last 25 years. You know, and have a lot of heritage and history in providing these services. And we always, as Bytes, use the best in breed partners to deliver technology where we can, and obviously that's to help our reseller channel as well, to take that to their customers and been able to provide that level of service. So what we have here, you know, with the Microsoft Cloud PBX, you can have over the top of it enhanced IVRs, so where, you know, you've got customers that have complex call queues, IVRs, hub groups, you know, different menus, options, queues, how those calls are distributed across the organization. That takes additional software over the top, or, you know, sort of third-party integration to allow for that level of feature functionality. And you know, that is pretty much, you know, the 80-20 rule. 20% of all customers will have that sort of complexity. This is what we generally see, and 80% will just use the bare bones feature where Microsoft, you know, out of the box functionality can meet most of those requirements. So when we start to look into things like contact center, you know, there is again a huge amount of Microsoft certified contact center providers out there. You've got a number of different options in terms of what those providers, how they integrate with Microsoft and how they use Microsoft's API, and also things like the bot framework to allow for that contact center to be a far richer experience. So we look at things like the Power Partners, where it's a pure native Teams experience from a contact center perspective. So an agent will live inside Teams. You know, there's no third party of additional screen that you need to go into inside that to be, you know, an agent. It is all driven within Microsoft Teams, which makes it far more, you know, seamless from an end user perspective. And again, you've got that ability to say, you know, if people need to work from home as a contact center agent or work from anywhere as a contact center agent, that now becomes completely feasible. So if you look at some of the challenges, especially, you know, when we've been working with people like RBS, you know, and some of the larger banks that have got, you know, historic Cisco call managers in there and contact center, they just were not able to have the speed and the agility to be able to deploy new technology to allow those agents to work from home, which has obviously, you know, caused quite a considerable amount of headaches, as it has done for a lot of organizations that have had legacy platforms in there that were just not ready to move to pure cloud telephony and contact center. So this is where we're really seeing the new age of what hybridized working looks like. It is that ability to work from anywhere, and it is that ability to be far more productive, you know, and this is where we're seeing organizations optimize and accelerate their own businesses through deploying Microsoft Teams and these third-party contact center products to allow for that flexible hybrid working lifestyle. Again, another thing to take into consideration, you know, you've got reception consoles and receptionists that need, you know, that functionality of being able to transfer calls, to see all the calls queuing, again, to have that sort of IVR type functionality and being able to transfer those calls to people. And using Teams, again, you know, there's multiple different ways of doing that. You've got operator consoles from different vendors, like Altigen, Anywhere 365, and there's a few others out there as well. So again, there's a number of different options, and it just depends what the customer's looking for from a user interface and how those operators feel about using those reception consoles. So one of the important elements of deploying any technology, whether it's Teams, whether it's endpoint management, you know, is around how do I train my end users on using this new technology? How do I communicate out to people that there's a really positive change that's going to happen, and the impact of that change is going to be positive on their day-to-day lives? So this really comes down to, you know, change management, and then having a blended learning approach. So when I say change management, so we're talking around ProSci and ADKAR methodologies, where, you know, a change management practitioner will work with the organization to come in and do things like persona mapping, and understanding what those personas look like in the business, and then they will come up with a Marcom's plan of how to communicate out the change. Because obviously moving away from a traditional desk phone, you know, whether it's Cisco, Mitel to Microsoft Teams, and even if people are moving from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams, it's a completely different beast in terms of how it operates in this new world. It's not just about Teams, it's obviously everything that it integrates with across the rest of the Microsoft 365 stack. So when we're talking around, you know, end user training and adoption, what's the difference between like SharePoint and OneDrive? When do I store my files in OneDrive, and when do I store them in SharePoint? You know, all of this needs communicating out so people are comfortable with how they're using it, and again, how to do things like set up channels. What's the best practice in terms of that governance from an IT standpoint? You need to really look at that in depth, because otherwise what we've seen happen is there's just a lot of sprawl that goes on, and then you've got IT admins that have to retrofit or redesign everything, which can be, you know, quite time consuming and challenging. But more importantly, this is about, you know, moving from traditional PBX to Microsoft Teams and voice, and how do you make calls, how do you receive calls, how do you transfer calls? You know, people need to be trained on that. There is, again, a plethora of information out there. So, you know, we've seen organizations that have things like LinkedIn Learning. You know, you can customize certain training elements, pull stuff off from the web. You've also, within Microsoft Teams itself, you can search for training materials. But what we've seen work really successfully is, again, the change management with the blended learning approach from an e-learning platform. So the one that we use is by a company in the US called Brainstorm. Now they have about 80 developers who do nothing else but update all the content on this platform. So it has access to over 4,500 guided learning materials on pretty much the entire Microsoft 365 stack. So whether that's Teams Voice, whether it's Power Apps, whether it's Power BI, whether it's Excel. But what this is allowing organizations to do is continue customers, employees' learning paths, and make sure that they are up to speed with, you know, what is the latest and greatest as far as, you know, Microsoft feature functionality across those different elements are used. So it's really helping people make the most out of that investment that they've got within Microsoft 365, and, you know, empowering employees to be as productive as possible and using new tools and everything else. Because I mean, if you know, you look at the changes that's gone in just on like Excel, Word, you know, over the last few years, it's quite incredible, the rate of pace, and it's challenging for a lot of people to keep up with that. You know, and it's the same with Teams. You know, the amount of feature functionality that comes into Teams on a monthly basis is incredibly hard to keep up with as well. So having something like an e-learning platform that allows end users to be able to, you know, keep on that sort of learning and adoption platform really does help with that all up productivity. Okay, so you know, we're seeing a lot of people now moving, you know, towards Power Automate, Power Apps, chatbots, virtual assistants to really help with, you know, whether it's customer experience. So again, when we're looking at things like contact centers, you know, how people are interacting with customers via the web, these virtual agents, you know, are quite quick to spin up and are just massively extensible. So, you know, you can have multiple different agents feeding into one centralized repository, you know, that's giving huge amounts of business insight into what customers are, you know, what questions they're asking, how they're interacting with those chatbots. So if you've got a chatbot on a website, you can have a Q&A. So that front ends everything from a, you know, an agent perspective. So it'll take a lot of the legwork out of that. And then, you know, all of that information is then captured and can be pulled back into, you know, a CRM platform, for example. But really, what the interesting thing we're seeing is more, obviously, if those of you that are sort of familiar with Viva, you know, we're seeing, you know, partners and customers develop chatbots that, you know, are helping with employee wellness and satisfaction. Obviously, since lockdown, you know, making sure that people who have been working from home are, you know, are basically empowered to have that experience of still being in touch with people, you know, that HR can understand, you know, what people are doing on a daily basis, how they're feeling, you know, if their mood's down and everything else. You know, you can make these chatbots, you know, into Q&A chatbots to feed that information back into HR, you know, and it's all guided by privacy laws and everything else. So, you know, that is really helping people understand and make sure that their employees are at the front and center of what they're doing and how they're working and communicating on a daily basis. So when we look at things like Power BI, again, you can obviously use Power BI to pull different data from different data points. So we're taking data dips into various different elements. You know, that could be from, you know, the PSTN calling side, then that can be from, you know, how many meetings are people doing on a day, you know, how much spare time have they got, and you can pull all of this information into a nice visual dashboard, you know, which can be used then to present out to management. And that's really, you know, providing a lot of insights into, you know, what people are doing and how that data has been used, and, you know, just getting the most out of the information and customers' IP, and really, you know, helping organisations with that productivity. So Imran, with that, I will hand it over to you just to talk around the current Microsoft Reseller initiatives.
Hi Al, thank you very much for that. Just a quick introduction to myself. I'm Imran Malik. I'm the Microsoft channel partner lead here at Byte. So I work with our wider account team and partners like yourselves in helping you guys navigate the wonderful world of Microsoft. One of the areas that comes up was the incentives. We have actually announced these on our October newsletter, but they will come out on our November one as well. So I just wanted to run these by you quickly. There are two incentives that have been released this year. One is the M365 Business Premium. So any partner that basically increases their net paid seats ad or MPSA performance will receive $20 per each seat, with a threshold up to $20,000 per partner. So that's a fantastic one if you are looking to drive M365 Business Premium across your customers. And the program actually begins on the incentive actually begins on the 1st of October. You would have actually received an invite from Microsoft via email. If not, please do go onto your partner center, and under your membership and incentives, there should be a notification. If you don't see it, then just raise a support ticket and Microsoft will actually send you the invite. The second one is the modern work incentive, Teams Phone for SMB. So for every partner that has a customer that's under 30 seats of Microsoft Business Voice with or without calling plans, if you actually go over 30 seats, then you will actually get $500 per campaign with up to $10,000 for the maximum per partner as well. So this is a fantastic opportunity if you are looking to drive the Teams aspect to your end customers as well. This started on the 1st of September, and we do have a link which we will share with you after the call with the slides. It's Microsoft Forms, and you can sign up directly on there for that as well. So any questions across these two, what's entailed, terms and conditions, then do reach out to myself and the team. My details are there directly, or you can contact us at tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. Andrew, I don't know if there's anything else you want to cover off at the end?
No, I think we've covered all. So yeah, we'll just have a couple of questions that will pop up on the screen for everybody to answer. But otherwise, thank you for joining us today, and yeah, we hope to see you all on some future events soon.